welcome back to my channel. My name is Jordan and I am joined today again by the amazing Galatea from The Authentic Observer. I'm so excited to be doing another collaboration with her, and I'm so excited about this collaboration in particular because it's a video that I've wanted to make for a while now, because I love both of these stories so much, and I'm sure by the title you've already figured it out. In this video we're going to be comparing Percy Jackson and Harry Potter, the original source material, the books, and then in Galatea's video we're going to be comparing the adaptations. Alright Galatea, do you want to introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about your channel?
Okay, hello, I am Galatea from The Authentic Observer, and I am so happy to be collaborating with Jordan again. So yeah, I'm very excited for this video as well, because hopefully there'll be a lot of interesting stuff to discuss. So thank you for having me on your channel.
Alright, so let's dive into this. So for me, Percy Jackson was so crucial and important in my kind of fundamental growing up years. I loved those books. And of course I loved Harry Potter too, but Percy Jackson was really special to me. And I think that the opposite is true with Galatea, which is why I'm so excited to make this video.
Yeah, definitely, exact opposite. Harry Potter was like my whole childhood, so yeah, and I didn't read Percy Jackson until quite a bit later than that.
So I think today what we'd like to discuss, especially because we're just looking at the books in this video, is what makes the Percy Jackson books and the Harry Potter books similar and what makes them different, and also I think why the Percy Jackson books resonated more with me, whereas the Harry Potter books resonated more with Galatea. So to kick it off, I think we should start by discussing some of the similarities.
Yeah, I think the obvious similarities between Percy Jackson and Harry Potter is firstly the age group they're aimed at, and the ages of the characters in the books are pretty much the same, I think, sort of 11, 12. And then you have as well the three main characters, so you've got Percy and Harry are similar in a lot of ways, then you have the smart girl, Hermione or Annabeth, and then you've got Grover or Ron as well as the loyal best friend. And they're both adventure, sort of fantasy stories about childhood and then growing up as well, and they, as a series, they both follow the process from sort of pre-adolescence until, you know, afterwards, or you know, sort of through the teen years.
So they're both long series, with Harry Potter having 7 books and Percy Jackson having 5 books, and they start at roughly the same age, with I think both Percy and Harry being 11 years old. And I think that this is important because yeah, structurally it's very similar in that each book, it's like kind of semi-episodic, with each book having a central conflict but building up to something much bigger in the end that will be the overarching problem of the series. In Harry Potter, for example, this is Voldemort, and in Percy Jackson, this is the war between the gods and the titans. So I think structurally as well, because of the kind of semi-episodic nature of it, you have elements being set up in each of the books that kind of build toward the central conflict of the series, but then you also have these problem of the week or problem of the book scenarios. In Harry Potter though, I think it's a little bit more focused towards building up to Voldemort, whereas in Percy Jackson, it's a little bit more not random, but while details do build up towards the war with the Titans, there is a lot more kind of problem of the week monsters and things that that Percy rather has to face that aren't necessarily to do with the Titans. Whereas I think with Harry, it is very focused on building up towards the thing with Voldemort, because each of the kind of problems of the book stems from something with Voldemort.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that's definitely true. I think it is very tied in, even if something at first doesn't seem to be sort of that concerned with Voldemort, it always ties in with it. Like with the Goblet of Fire, there wasn't, it seemed, a whole lot there, but then you find out that different characters that Harry couldn't quite work out and different events, of course it all ties back to Voldemort and him orchestrating it. So yeah, I think that is true.
So I think part of the reason that Percy Jackson seems a little bit less focused is because of the source material. With all of the Greek kind of myths, you have this sort of monster of the week story that kind of materializes. The hero has to face several monsters, and it can seem a little bit unfocused before they reach their goal or the final monster in the end. So I think that Rick Riordan was kind of trying to reference or hark back to the original kind of Greek myths to tell his stories in a kind of similar fashion, which I appreciate, but can make the stories seem a little less focused and like they're building towards something in general.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, what's just made me think of there is, of course, J.K. Rowling sort of does a similar thing, obviously not to the same extent, but she weaves in really subtle elements of mythology as well, actually. Not in an obvious way, but with things like, so Minerva McGonagall, of course, named after, like, well, the Roman equivalent to Athena and, you know, stuff like that. Yeah, but obviously not to the same extent, and she's sort of gone more, rather than, you know, gods and heroes, she's sort of more like in witchy. She's got more, I think, creative control because she doesn't have to rely so much on, or at least like be accurate to the myths that because she's not really drawing from them as much.
No, I completely agree. I think that J.K. Rowling kind of does a similar thing with the magic and folklore that Riordan does with the Greek mythology, in that she weaves in elements that we're familiar with. For example, you know, palm reading and all the kind of botany and potion stuff that we know are kind of magical and mystical, and she integrates them into the story in interesting ways, which is what Riordan does with the Greek elements into the story. So they don't necessarily add to the conflict or the story as a whole, but are there for setting, and sometimes they crop up in ways that we don't expect in later books or later in the story. I think we should discuss the characters now, move on from the structure, and kind of look at our heroes and the adults and all of those kind of elements.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I remember, is that even in the Percy Jackson books, it changes in Harry Potter as they get older, but at the beginning the adults seem quite involved, like you've got sort of all the teachers and Mrs. Weasley and stuff like that. Percy Jackson, I seem to remember, and I guess that fits with the whole heroes thing, you're sort of on your own a little bit, it's like less support there or less influence from
See, I think that's interesting because I don't necessarily agree. I think that the interactions with the adults are certainly different, but I think that while the gods are treated as a little bit more standoffish, they're still integrated in very important ways into the story. For example, Mr. Brunner, who it turns out to be the centaur Chiron, is a really important role model character in Percy Jackson's life. He's old and wise and is similar to Albus Dumbledore in the way that he interacts with Percy in this kind of mysterious fashion, and also as this kind of guiding hand. On top of that, you have the interactions with the gods, which are different and I think a very interesting facet of these books. They're kind of role models and very important figures in all of the young demigods' lives, because obviously they are one of the parents of all of these children. So they're kind of inherently these role models, but at the same time, because they're all powerful beings, because they've had literally thousands of kids over the millennia that they've been alive, they're not traditional parental figures, nor do they necessarily care as much about their kids as their kids care about them. One of the central issues in the first book, and actually several books of the Percy Jackson series, is finding out who your godparent is. A lot of the times, the gods don't necessarily care to claim their kids, and the kids are left in this sort of limbo of trying to figure out who they are, which I think is an important part of their characters' characterization, as well as an interesting metaphor. So while I don't think that the gods play necessarily the same role that the teachers do, in that they're kind of traditional role models that help and are interacting with the kids all the time, I do think that they're a really integral part of the story.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, because think about it, I couldn't quite put my finger on how to explain it, but actually I think it's that more is expected of Percy. Whereas, so both Harry and Percy go on adventures from a young age, but the difference was that Harry was told by the adults around him not to, and that he wasn't old enough and it was too dangerous, Whereas with Percy, he's sort of a demigod, it's expected of him, and it was almost like he's pushed to do it, was sort of what I got from it. Is that fair to say? That
For sure, and in the first book especially, because he's the kid of one of the three main gods, he's Poseidon's son, he is kind of forced into this situation where, you know, he's blamed for a lot of things and he has to be diplomatic, and he's forced to basically clear his name and his father's name, which is a ton of pressure for an 11-year-old. He's kind of sucked into the problem and is this central kind of figure where everything's kind of being blamed on him, and he has very little protection from the adults in his life because they're the ones blaming things on him. Whereas with Harry Potter, I think it's a lot less so, and they're kind of discouraging him from pursuing the adventure, whereas he's kind of doing the, you know, he's putting that on himself.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So I think now we should kind of move on to the heroes of the story. So do you want to kick it off, Galateo, with Harry Potter?
Yeah, so obviously the main character of Harry Potter is Harry himself, and then the other two most important characters are of course Ron and Hermione. And they all work quite well together. So you've got Harry, who, as the hero, he's quite, he's the one who's experiencing this magical world for the first time. He's also, in the books at least, he's quite, and gets more so later, he's got a very bad temper and he can be quite sassy sometimes. And then we've got Hermione, who is obviously very intelligent, very clever, but can panic quite a bit. And then Ron, who is the loyal, you know, sort of the loyal best friend, and who seems to be able to think on his feet quite well. Yeah, and they all work very well together, I think, as a trio.
So I think, jumping back, that's an important thing to note structurally, that both Percy and Harry find out that they're part of this magical world that they didn't know existed, kind of hidden in the real world. I think that's also important to note structurally for the characters as well, because both Grover and Ron are very familiar with this magic world, and they act as sort of the guide for the main characters, Percy and Harry, into the magical world. Grover, for example, is tasked to protect Percy, and once they get brought into Camp Half-Blood, he is kind of the source of knowledge for all of the, you know, mythological things. And I think that the same can kind of be said for Harry. Ron serves the same purpose in providing a lot of the cultural things that are important for the wizarding world. Annabeth, like Hermione, is wise and smart. She's the daughter of Athena, so she has the same kind of traits as her mother in that she's more academically focused, which is interesting because none of the Camp Half-Blood kids are, because all of them are dyslexic, all of them have ADHD just because of their god parents. So the fact that she is a little bit more academically inclined is noticeable, even though she's not nearly as academically inclined as Hermione. She is kind of the one who thinks them out of problems though, and is really the source of the kind of knowledge, not necessarily culturally, of the mythological world, but she's the one who is constantly thinking logically and is the one who's sorting themselves out of problems mentally. I think Annabeth in the books shares more similarities with Hermione from the movies than Hermione from the books. Annabeth in the books is a lot more hot-tempered, and I think that she and Hermione are very similar in regards to personality from Hermione from the movies, whereas Hermione from the books is a little bit more awkward and a little less hot-tempered and kind of quick to, you know, fight or whatever.
It's interesting what you're saying about Annabeth being the logical one and Grover being that sort of cultural insight into the world, because I think it's quite a similar thing with Ron and Hermione. So Hermione, like Harry, isn't, well, she was you know, Muggle-born, so she also is experiencing the world for the first time, but unlike Harry, she's done her reading and her research. So while factually she knows a lot about the wizarding world, it's really Ron that has the cultural insight to it, so he brings that aspect, whereas Hermione knows a lot more than he does about history or things that he, you know, has no interest in in looking at.
Yeah, I think that's an important element of both books because they each of the kind of side characters or the trio members have very important roles in the development of both Percy and Harry. Both Percy and Harry are kind of more physical, and that's how they react to situations. It's not necessarily with their brains first, it's with their swords or wands first. I think Percy and Harry are both quick to jump to physical action, and I think Ron and Grover are also likely to do that, but I think that their strengths and what they bring to the table is that they will do that to help, you know, because of their loyal nature and to help someone that they care for rather than dragging themselves into that situation in the first place. They'll do it to protect, but they won't necessarily, they're not as quick to, you know, just jump into a situation physically. And then of course, you know, they're each bringing elements that are important to understanding and completing the missions, like for example, Grover and Ron's cultural understanding, Hermione and Annabeth's, you know, logical understanding of the world, and then of course Harry and Percy and their physical capabilities. It creates this perfect trifecta.
It does, yeah. They all work very well together. All got their qualities, really.
Oh, another thing that I think is interesting with Ron and Grover is that they're both kind of meant to be the kind of comical one of the three. With Ron and with Grover, especially Grover in the books, they're definitely funny, but yeah, it's almost through their failures and what they're not able to do and some of their quirkiness, especially with Ron. I think that Grover does have a little bit more like one-liner funniness, but if I remember correctly, in the books it's a lot more understated than in the movies. So they're both meant to be this comic relief, but they're not like overplayed or, you know, they don't sacrifice their character for that in the books.
I think Ron in particular, from what I remember, it's also his him being the comic relief and also through his failures is used to add to his character. So he's always felt, you know, because he's the youngest son, he's always felt not as good as all his older brothers because they've all got things they're really good at and excel at, and he doesn't really have anything that he excels at. And then of course his best friend is Harry Potter, who is, you know, well, he's Harry Potter, so he's always sort of, he's never really in the limelight, never feels like he's the best of the best, and even though that is used as comic relief, it also does add to his character and also creates an interesting tension to the relationship between Harry and Ron, because that does create problems, you know, on occasion. So yeah, it's not just there for comic relief, it really adds to the character.
And I think that's an important element of Grover's character as well, but it kind of manifests in a different way. Grover was charged to protect another hero before he protected Percy, and he ended up failing at it. So there's this added pressure for Grover to protect Percy because he failed once. So he's already kind of set up as this, you know, character who can't do anything right, and he believes that of himself, though he tries desperately because he cares for Percy, but also because he wants to basically get his horns. Like, there's this whole backstory about him wanting to be a protector and not being a fit protector that is an important aspect to his personality as well. And while I think that it's different the way that it manifests in him and in Ron, it's an important element to both of their characters that they feel like they're a bit of a failure. Alright, so next I think we are going to move on to kind of some of the cultural differences in the Harry Potter books versus the Percy Jackson books, because Harry Potter is so British and Percy Jackson is so American, and they really embrace that about kind of themselves. I'm gonna let Galatea talk about the Britishness of the Harry Potter books, and then I, of course, will talk about the Americanisms of the Percy Jackson books. So do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the cultural differences really does have a huge impact on the stories and how they differ. One of the really big things that stood out to me when considering the cultural differences is that, so obviously America seems to be a very forward-thinking nation, you know, this whole like American dream, it's the new world, all of this stuff. Like always looking forward to new things and advancing. It's the sort of the stereotype anyway. Yeah, whereas Britain is very much concerned with the past and the history and tradition and all of that. So I find it really interesting how those two different sort of approaches manifested in the stories. So with Percy Jackson, what was interesting is you had all these magical objects and they've been really modernised. So things like, I think it was a phone, was it, at one point that Hermes had? Rather than the two snakes that talked to him, it became a phone, didn't it, or something? So yeah, in Percy Jackson, a lot of the magical objects are sort of modernised, and although Greek myths are brought forward, you know, into the future, but very modern. Whereas in Harry Potter, a lot of the things, it's very nostalgic. So you've got the castle, they're still writing with, you know, quills and parchment, the steam train.
Sorry, just to jump in, it's interesting how in Harry Potter you have the quill that does something magical, and in Percy Jackson you have a ballpoint pen that he clicks and becomes a sword. It's an interesting look at how the magical objects are different and how they're used.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, and exactly, and we've got things like, well, I think that was in the books, the casino, wasn't it, as well, in Percy Jackson?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Percy Jackson, even the settings are quite modernised. We've got the casino, whereas, again, Harry Potter, it's all either in ancient castles or, you know, things that are very old, basically. And then, so of course, the settings as well, we've got, I think, yeah, summer camps aren't really a British thing, but from what I understand, they're quite big in America, so it's like that aspect of it, which is, you know, Camp Half-Blood, whereas Harry Potter, it's taken sort of the most British stereotypes of boarding school and used that as the setting for it. So yeah, it's very much, and that of course impacts the whole story and the atmosphere and the whole world, really.
Yeah, so I think that is an interesting aspect of both of the books. And while I agree that Harry Potter does tend to focus more on tradition, I think that American history and American culture is a huge part of the Percy Jackson books as well. As you mentioned, there is the casino in the Percy Jackson books, but it's kind of this like retro, you know, 60s, 70s Las Vegas casino, and it's kind of trapped in a time warp, which is, you know, just one element that I think is really interesting. They travel a lot in the Percy Jackson books all over America, and there's a lot of really important, historically significant elements of American culture that are kind of interwoven into the story, which is what I think is such an interesting element of the story, because it takes these Greek myths and Greek kind of storytelling devices and interweaves it, makes it interwoven, words man, and weaves it in with all of the American modern things. So while they're kind of similar, there is definitely more of a modern twist on all of the Percy Jackson things. And I think also the settings is an important note of both Camp Half-Blood and Hogwarts, because they're both kind of treated as this safe zone, this safe place. But in Harry Potter, Hogwarts is also kind of the center of all of the conflict, at least for the first several books. And there's kind of all these dark elements of, you know, magic and things going on that are within Hogwarts or near Hogwarts, these kind of mysterious elements, and you get that dark and light. Whereas with Percy Jackson, Camp Half-Blood is a mostly safe zone. There are some things that happen around the perimeter or inside, but for the most part it's this safe zone, and they have to adventure outside of Camp Half-Blood to find the conflict and to find all of the kind of story that progresses the books.
Yeah, that it's, I don't know if you said that because it cut up a bit, but that as more places in the castle become danger zones, it seems to be directly related to like them all growing up and everything, which is a good point, I thought, and interesting.
Alright guys, so that is it for my video, kind of looking at the source material, the books of Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, and kind of some of the similarities and differences. But now we're going to be talking about the adaptations and what went so wrong with the Percy Jackson adaptations and what went so right with the Harry Potter adaptations, and we'll be kind of comparing those two. Of course, we will be referencing some of the source material stuff as well in Galatea's video, so There will be that and things that we didn't touch on, but the focus of that video is going to be how they screwed up so much on one and how they did so well on the other, and what we can learn from that. So if you're interested in that video, I'm going to link her channel and that video down below, and you can go check those out. Her channel is amazing, and you should definitely binge all of her videos because she is so smart and you will love her. But thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and click the like button. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these two books and some of the, similarities and differences that you enjoyed or didn't enjoy between the two of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.